Williamson. I know some of you are probably people that I've met before, and then I know, and some of you perhaps are people that I haven't met before. Welcome to the Citizen Campaign Call. We're doing these every other week, and what we're going to do is every other week, we're going to take a particular topic and have a particular guest who can talk to us about the topic. Last time we were with Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang is another person who's running for president for the Democratic nomination. And we talked particularly about the issue of universal basic income. I talked about how I've been reading his book, The War on Normal People, and his case for universal income really opened my mind, particularly the realization of the tsunami that's on its way in terms of automation. How many jobs will be permanently removed? So the idea of universal basic income is now part of my economic platform as well. He convinced me on that. And then next week, we're going to have a very interesting campaign call. Not next week, in the next 2 weeks will be on March 27th. And that's that I will be talking to Professor Sandy Darity and to Kirsten Mullen about the idea of reparations. I will tell you a little bit later in the call about Professor Darity's work. I'm very excited that he will be with us. And then every other Citizen Campaign Call, I will want to have my own conversation with you about the internal dynamics of politics that are so important. What we're talking about here, what we're forging with this campaign is an integrative whole person politics. What do I mean by that? Well, it used to be that if you got sick, you thought in terms of going to a doctor, and hopefully the doctor, through some allopathic external remedy, could suppress or eradicate the symptoms that you were experiencing. Well, we now know that it's a much bigger picture than that. You have to cultivate health. You can't just treat disease. That disease is the absence of health. Health is not the absence of disease. And there are many, many layers to the cultivation of health, and there are many, many layers to the cultivation, excuse me, many, many efforts to many, many dimensions and layers to the effort to treat disease. Psychological levels, emotional levels, spiritual levels. We know, for instance, that stress is the main cause of illness. So addressing the issues of stress on a psychological and emotional level. And we also know that people who attend spiritual support groups live twice as long after diagnosis of a serious life-threatening illness on the average as do those who do not. So when it comes to the medical paradigm, we have included the soul. We've included the whole person. Things have shifted. And now we need to do the same thing with politics. Because the dominant paradigm regarding politics can be likened to the old allopathic model of medicine. It has nothing to do with the deeper causes of our political dysfunctions and everything to do with treating the symptoms once they appear. You know, one of my favorite quotes from Martin Luther King is that there are two kinds of peace, negative peace and positive peace. He said negative peace is where there is no outright conflict, but there is underlying tension and anxiety. He said the only way to have positive peace is through the cultivation of brotherhood and justice. So we have to look at more than just the symptoms of our political problems. We have to look at their deeper causes. And their deeper causes have to do with the things that go on inside people. Now, our dominant political conversation is so disconnected from our deeper humanity. It's about hard facts and data and economic statistics, completely disconnected from the heart, disconnected from the soul, disconnected from that which makes humanity most meaningful. And this has had, not only does this form an inadequate and even inaccurate container for the energies that we need to bring forth right now in order to navigate and transform these times. It's inadequate because it's not the wholeness of who we are, and it's inaccurate because it's not the wholeness of who we are. I'm not a number. I'm not a statistic. I'm a woman. I'm a human being. And what is happening in politics is that we talk about issues only in terms of externals. What are we going to do about this issue? What are we going to do about that issue? Well, if all you do is address your issues on the level of the externals, then all that has to happen is for a new Congress to come in or a new president to come in and repeal what the last one did. We have to go deeper. We have to do more than just water the leaves of our democracy. We need to water the roots. And the roots are inside us. You know, I'm so sorry about my cough. The principles that are inscribed in our Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, that all men are given by God unalienable rights of life and of liberty, of the pursuit of happiness, and that governments are instituted among men to secure those rights. And then the added injunction by Abraham Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address that ours is to be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. These are radical. They were radical in 1776 and radical in the 1860s, and they're radical now. If they are only inscribed in marble on walls somewhere in Washington and they're not ablaze in our hearts, they lose moral force. They become external principles or even legal principles, but they lose soul force. That was the term that Gandhi used. So the purpose of this campaign, in many ways, is to forge a new era in American history that can only be brought forth by a politics that is no longer entrenched in late 20th century politics and economics, both of those having been products of an old Newtonian paradigm left over from the 20th century, which basically posits that life is a big machine. And so all you have to do, if you want to change the machine, fix the machine, is tweak the pieces of the machine. But there's a British physicist named James Jeans who said, it turns out that life is not one big machine, it's one big thought. So just as our founders liked to think of themselves as Enlightenment thinkers, they saw themselves as the enlightened philosophers of politics. In many ways, they were. But the Enlightenment of that time had to do with overthrowing the obfuscation and the over-mystification of religious dogma in favor of rational thought and what people could think for themselves, and overthrowing, that Enlightenment was about overthrowing the oppression and the domination of institutions such as aristocracy in favor of the rights of the individual. Well, now, over 200 years later, it's time to introduce a new kind of Enlightenment thinking into our politics. And that's the Enlightenment of the 21st century. You know, I feel particularly about young people who are going to live the vast majority of their lives in the 21st century, some of whom are going to live the entirety of their lives in the 21st century, should not be burdened by the obsolete thinking left over from the 20th. It's just like when you grow up and you get old enough to really take a good look at your parents' behavior. And you go, wow. And you see certain things and you go, that was good. That's really impressive. And I want to stand on their shoulders. And I want to carry on the good work that they did. And I want to be even better in my lifetime. Other things you might see in your parents' behavior and you go, you know, that's a pattern that's not going to go forward from here. I'm not going to give that one to my children. I'm going to break that chain. And most of life, as we individuate, that's what we do. We decide what we're going to take forward and what we're going to break free of. And civilizations do that too. The 20th century mind was very different than the 19th century mind. The 21st century mind is already very different than the 20th century mind. Religion, spirituality, philosophy, recovery, psychotherapy, higher consciousness, these things aren't fringe. This is where people live. Our politics, the dominant thought system in American politics, that's what we should consider fringe, because it is so narrow. It is so two-dimensional. It sees problems only in terms of what's above the waterline and how do we fix it. Well, that's not transformation. That means you might fix something, but it doesn't mean you're going to transform anything. And it means that even if you elect the person that you want, the forces that oppose the things you want will be so back the next election cycle. So how do we genuinely, fundamentally transform the trajectory that has brought us to where we are? With the understanding that when it comes to politics, where we are is very dangerous. We now live at a time where our government functions as really little more than a system of legalized bribery. You know, today, the president did finally, thank goodness, ground all of the Boeing MAX 8 aircrafts, which unfortunately, there were those two horrifying and fatal plane crashes in Ethiopia and in Africa, other place in Africa. All these nations, all these advanced nations of the world grounded those planes almost immediately. China grounded them almost immediately. After that second crash, it was like, wait, something's going on with this Boeing MAX 8. China grounded immediately. Most European countries grounded immediately. Only the United States took a few days. Now, fortunately and gratefully, thankfully, the president did finally ground the Boeing MAX 8 today. But let's talk about why it took so long. The reason it took so long is because our FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, much like the EPA, much like it happens in area after area after area, the institutions, the government itself, and the governmental institutions, which should be primarily and solely, really, in terms of their deepest functioning, advocates for the health and well-being of people and planet, have become advocates in too many cases for the profitability, the short-term profitability of these multinational corporate entities. Guess how much Boeing, and nowhere is this more obvious, clear, or disturbing than how it relates to the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, which should just be about safety in the skies, and their relationship to airplane manufacturers, including Boeing. Boeing spent this last year $15 million. $15 million on lobbying efforts. That's how corrupt our government is. The kind of money, I mean, how can you and I possibly compete with that? Now, what's going to solve this? Well, we're not going to overturn Citizens United, which is the Supreme Court decision a few years ago, which made the unlimited amounts of corporate money possible flowing into our political system. So we're not going to have that anytime soon because we have a mainly corporatist Supreme Court, which sides over and over and over again with the rights of corporations more than the rights of people. But there are a lot of state efforts that we can all be involved in the in the journey, hopefully, ultimately, to the public financing, a constitutional amendment that would establish public financing for federal campaigns. In the meantime, there's only one thing that will override the forces of a corporatocracy. Now, remember, a corporatocracy is basically an aristocracy. You know, money's good, getting rich is good, it's all good that people can make money in America. We love that. There's a difference between wealth and aristocracy. So it's not like every rich person is greedy any more than every poor person is noble and pure. This is not about making rich people bad. The problem is not that some people get rich in America. The problem is that not enough people have a chance to create wealth in America, to the point where 1% of the population owns as much as the bottom 90%. I mean, that's just obscene. And the late Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis said, you can have large amounts of money concentrated in the hands of a few, or you can have democracy. You cannot have both. So, like I said, wealth and aristocracy are two different things. Wealth means people can make money in America. Aristocracy is when the function of government, through tax policies, through subsidies, through issue after issue after issue, through such as the FAA and what we're talking about here, when our institutions are used as advocates for these powers, Aristocracy is when the whole system is set up in a way to make it easier for the rich to get richer and harder for the poor to create wealth. When government serves the few at the expense of the many. I really apologize about the cough. So the canard, of course, which was sold us over the last 40 years is, no, this will be good. You just give that money to the job creators and then the money trickles down to everyone else. Well, after 40 years, I think the jury is in on that. The evidence is clear. That philosophy did not lift all boats, quite the opposite. It left millions of people without even a life vest or life raft. And it has destroyed our middle class, created a situation where 40% of the American people have to struggle. The average person in America has $4,000 in savings. And with $4,000 in savings, that means that a $400 or $500 unexpected hit to your health or something like that is a terrible, terrible thing. And 57% of Americans have $1,000 to their name. So in the richest country in the world, we have tremendous, tremendous economic despair on the part of too many. But we're talking here about the soul of citizenship. Well, the soul is that which is the path of the heart. Spirituality is the path of the heart. A politics in which millions of American children living in poverty and near poverty, living in America's domestic war zones, living with chronic trauma that we have simply normalized. A politics that neglects the well-being of these children is soulless. A politics which doesn't recognize America's need to admit our own character defects and atone and make amends where we need to is soulless because it's not whole person. And it needs to be, because the same psychological and emotional and spiritual dynamics that prevail within the life of one person prevail within the life of a country, because all that a country is people. And a politics which is content to go on and on and on about preparing for war without making a concomitant commitment to waging peace is soulless. Not only that, the only way to override this is through an internal awakening within us. We now have a situation where a minority worldview is running this country. Many more people in this country love than hate. I think many more people in this world love than hate. But those who hate, hate with conviction. Martin Luther King said, those of us who wish peace must organize effectively as do those who wish war. So those who hate, hate with conviction. Conviction is a force multiplier. We must now expand our sense of personal responsibility beyond the purview of the personal self. It's not that Americans aren't loving people. We're good people. We're no better than anyone else, but we're no worse than anyone else. I see a lot of dignity. I see a lot of love. I see a lot of compassion. The issue is that over the last few decades, we have circumscribed our issues of personal growth only within the context of me, of the personal self. It's not that Americans don't wake up in the morning and say, what do I have to do today to be good? What do I have to do today to be ethical? What is the ethical choice for me to make in a particular situation? We do ask ourselves those things. The issue is that we have disconnected from a question like, what does my country have to be good? What is an economic system that is actually not just successful for a few, but really good? And wouldn't good mean an economic system in which more people are uplifted and opportunity is expanded for more people than just a very few? We have to ask ourselves, what is the ethical consideration that applies not just to my personal behavior, but to my nation's behavior? I'll give you an example. $100 billion in arms. $100 billion arms sale to the Prince of Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia is using all that support, military support, to prosecute a war in Yemen, which is basically genocidal. They are starving tens of thousands of people, including many, many children. Look on the internet and look at those pictures. And our Secretary of State said, well, you can have strategic partnerships, which he means sales, obviously. He said, you can have strategic partnerships with people who do not share your values. No, you can't. If you're willing to sell $100 billion in arms to a country that you know is doing that, you have sacrificed your values. So the soul of citizenship is where we realize that these questions of meaning and purpose and spirituality, what it means to live a good life, applies not just to our individual lives, but to our collective experience as well. That we have to ask, not just am I a good person, but are we a good country? Not just a rich country, but a good country. And it's just a shift in ourselves. You know, that's how personal growth operates. There are these aha moments. And we now live at a time where the love that will save this world, you know, it's not just a love for our own children. It's a love for children on the other side of town, too. The love that will save the world is not just protection of our own home, but the realization that the earth itself is our home. You know, Wendy and I were talking earlier today about the plane crashes of those Boeing MAX 8s, and how one was in Ethiopia. The other one, I can't remember what part of Africa it was in. But when there's a tragedy, we immediately get the oneness of humanity. We really get, like, you know, that's my backyard, no matter where in the world it is, if it's a tragedy. We feel that when there's a tsunami or an earthquake. But we need to expand our thinking so that the issue of our citizenship, whether it has to do with everyone in your country or everyone in the world, is not just something that you think about if there's a tragedy, but something that you factor in to your sense of what makes your life meaningful and responsible. Citizenship is a responsibility. It's not just a right. Democracy, living in a free society, it's not just about rights, it's about responsibilities. And if you're a citizen of the most powerful country in the world, which those of us who are Americans are, the behavior of your government affects people, millions of people. And when we get it right, it's a beautiful thing. But when we get it wrong, it's devastating and can be devastating to millions of people. Iraq War and so forth. So part of the evolutionary impulse of this time, as we really own, you know, we've already entered into the 21st century. I mean, it's almost 20 years old. Now the issue is to inhabit, to really embody the consciousness that the 21st century is about. We will learn to love each other in this century, or we will not survive. You know, one of the things I say a lot is so many people have become sophisticated, more than we wish to be, about drugs and alcohol. We've all known people or known of people who didn't make it. And when it comes to drug addiction, alcoholism, if you have any observation of those things, you realize the survival of the physical body cannot be guaranteed. Well, Americans need to awaken from our magical thinking. The survival of our democracy is not guaranteed either. And we need to move even further out of our denial. The survival of the human race is not guaranteed. No species survives that displays maladaptive behavior that is maladaptive for its survival. If a species is behaving in a way that is maladaptive for its survival, one of two things is going to happen. It's either going to evolve in a different way, or it's going to go extinct. And our species displays maladaptive behavior. We are assaulting our own habitat, and we fight too much with weapons that are unsurvivable over the long run. One of the things you might have heard me talk about is how our Air Force has ordered 100 B-21 Raiders These are $550 million airplanes that are bombers that carry not only conventional bombs, but also nuclear bombs. This is what I mean by soulful citizenship. Don't look away from that. You know, Gandhi talked about soul force. Attend to the agony of others. Don't look away. You can't farm out your conscience. You can't farm out your politics. You farm out your politics, you know what we get? What we got. So why are we spending $550 million each on bombers, 100 of them, that carry nuclear bombs? Because you drop 5 of those, civilization as we know it is over. You drop 10 of those, the human race is probably over on this planet for at least 250, 300,000 years. It's painful. But that's what personal growth is. Personal growth is not always fun. And neither is the growth of a civilization. Citizenship means we have to go with our citizenship where we go in therapy, where we go in personal growth, where we go in religion and spirituality. You got to get real. That's what my campaign is about, and that's what my presidency would be about. We got to get real here. Because when we do get real and we do get honest and we do take that moral inventory and we do really face what needs to be faced within ourselves, and when we do that within our country, we will have miracles. Because the truth does set you free. Then we'll get to the other side of it. You know, you grow through a kind of detox. Stuff has to come up in order to be released, and then you see what you need to see, and we'll grow as people, and we'll grow as a country, and we'll solve things. But not unless we're willing to look at all of this. The soul, you know, that's why there are dark nights of the soul too. America is having a dark night of the soul right now. And if our only way of dealing with the dark night of the soul is through a level of conversation that has nothing to do with the soul, it's like Einstein saying that the problems of the world will not be solved, the level of thinking we were at when we created them. So this campaign is not just about you supporting me so that I can become president, and then I go to Washington and I use the powers of the presidency to act on surface issues, as important as they are. Those, you know, Martin Luther King said we must have quantitative changes in our circumstances and qualitative changes in our souls, in our hearts. I think qualitative changes in our hearts. The issue is we need that soulful politics where it's not just me going to Washington to fight for you, it's all of us co-creating. Because the real assaults to our democracy aren't just in Washington. They're in state houses, they're in governor's offices. They're all the places where there are these systemic and systematic efforts to remove the resources of this country away from the average citizen, which is what democracy, what America is supposed to be. That's the American dream. Not just that you can have what you want, but that all of us have a shot. So soulful citizenship is the only way ahead. It's not just a political class acting, you know, that's like the old allopathic model of medicine. The doctor will fix it. The politician will fix it. Saying the politician will fix it is no different than saying the doctor will fix it. We don't think that way anymore. We have to cultivate health. So many of the things, and we have to cultivate our democracy. So many of the things that are the real problems in America today, I think of them as opportunistic infections that would not have occurred had our immune system been stronger. And we, each and every one of us, as citizens, have to think of ourselves as the immune cells that make up a healthy and a vital civic life. That's not just your intellect. That's not just your power of reason. That's the power of your commitment. That's that emotional and spiritual thing that happens when you really do wish in your heart to live in honor of your ancestors and in devotion to your grandchildren and their grandchildren. Every person should live for more than just ourselves. And every generation should live for more than just itself. We're part of a long narrative of American history. And every generation writes its chapter in this continuing novel, as it were. We have to ask ourselves, what are we writing? And no more of this like, well, I'm not political. If you're breathing the air, given the fact that they've been gutting the Clean Air Act, you're political. Politics is affecting you. You might say I'm not political, but if you're drinking the water and they've been gutting the Clean Water Act, which they're doing, politics is touching you. You're swimming in an ocean of political realities, whether you're recognizing that or not. It's like people say I'm not spiritual. Everybody's on a spiritual path. Everybody's on a path of becoming. Some people just aren't conscious of it. And all of us are part of a great political unfolding, whether we're conscious of it or not. The value of being conscious of it is that we can then be at cause rather than at the effect. If you're not conscious of your political participation, it's an unconscious thing, you will be at the effect of what other people do. When you own it as part of your own spirit and soulful meaning and purpose on this earth, you become a cause. That is what our system is supposed to be, because our founders posited that the average citizen, the wisdom of the average citizen, if we are, that's why Jefferson said we had to have public education, so that the average citizen has honed and critical thought processes, and you have free press so that you have the information that you need, then we have what it takes to govern a great nation. Now we know that the signers of the Declaration of Independence, 41 of them were themselves slave owners. So we've always been this dichotomy between those whose hearts were ablaze with the possibilities of freedom and liberty and democracy, and those who had a very aristocratic view that it really might mean them, but not others. And every generation plays that out. And now it's our turn. So we too have some real aristocratic impulses in our society, at work in our politics, at work in our economics. And these forces have tremendous financial power and tremendous governmental power and tremendous technological power. There's only one way to override that. And that's a soulful, spiritual awakening with the American people, where we get, no, love is what matters most. Love is what matters most. We're going to put the well-being of our democracy, the well-being of our children, the well-being of our earth, our universal human values will come first. And when you really believe that, and I really believe that, and enough of us really believe that, boy, there will be nothing that we can't do. We abolished slavery. We gave women the right to vote. We passed civil rights legislation, dismantling the mechanisms of segregation. And now it's our turn. Enough with the preoccupation with ultimately superficial matters. You know, Martin Luther King said, your life begins to end on the day you stop talking about things that matter most. We need to not only talk about things that matter most now, we need to think about things that matter most, and we need to act on things that matter most. It's no longer a time when small random acts of kindness will do. We must have huge strategized acts of doing the right thing. When Teilhard de Chardin said, one day after man has mastered the winds and the tides and gravity, he will harness for God the energies of love. He said, then for the second time in human history, man will have discovered fire. I used to think that was really beautiful and aspirational, poetic. It's no longer just poetic. We have to do those things. That is the meaning of the 20th century, 21st century. And that is the meaning of our lives. And that is the soulfulness of politics. So I feel so grateful to be part of this process. I feel so honored to be running for president. I feel the profundity of this. I'm so grateful that you would participate with me in this conversation. I know that if this campaign emanates love and people feel attracted to this deeper conversation, because I think that's where we live inside our hearts, we are forging something very powerful and very beautiful, and we're forging it together. And victory on every level is possible according to God's will. May love prevail here and in all things. So I want to thank you very much. A lot of questions had come in. Wendy, the questions do you have anything besides what I had seen on my text before? May I? Okay. The largest lobby in the government is pharma. Pharma is trying to take away the rights of people, whether or not. Well, all of these are things that I would rather write about than talk about here because of the whole soulfulness. I want to keep it in that place. But I will talk about those things. A lot of you asked about, a lot of people have been writing in and asking about this issue of how we're going to get our own CNN town hall. It does seem as though there's a group of self-appointed gatekeepers, doesn't there? So if you feel like writing to CNN or to MSNBC, tweeting it out, contacting them online, hey, where's Marianne Williamson? She's running too. If your heart tells you to do that, then please do that. And as most of you are probably aware, in order for me to get onto the DNC debate stage, I have to have 65,000 individual unique contributors. So I hope you will go to Marianne 2020, go to that donate button. And even if you only give $1, that would count as one of those 65,000 donations. And that way, I need those because then I can be on the DNC debate stage. I would like that. I'm not running against anyone. I'm running with a lot of really smart, cool, good people. And like I said, I'm honored to be part of the process in participation with all of those other candidates and also in participation with you. So please spread the word, go deep in your own life. I hope this campaign is inspiring you to have book clubs, join with people to not only experience these citizen campaign calls. Now, let me tell you more about the one that's going to be held on March 27th. I want you to know about this because I want to get this right. Okay. Sandy Darity and Kirsten Mullen. Dr. William or Sandy Darity Jr. and Kirsten Mullen will discuss topics found in their forthcoming book, From Here to Equality, Black Reparations in the 21st Century. They will talk about the history of wealth inequality in the United States, examine failed promises, and outline the need for reparations to achieve justice for African Americans. Professor Darity is the Samuel Dubois Cook Professor and Director of the Samuel Dubois Cook Center on Social Equity at Drake University. He has also served as chair of the Department of African and African American Studies and was founding director of the Research Network on Racial and Ethnic Inequality. Kirsten Mullen is a well-known folklorist and the founding principal of Artifactual and Arts Consulting Practice. She also did a great deal of research and reporting for the construction of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., and the two of them are married. Now, I've spoken to Professor Darity. As you probably know, reparations has been a pillar of my campaign from the beginning. From the time when I first announced. And I have been talking about that ever since my book, Healing the Soul of America, came out in the late 90s. So once again, as I said, every other citizen call will spend with a guest talking about some significant political issue. And the times when we're not with a guest, I'll be talking, as I was today, about the internal changes. That alone will create the container for the emergence of genuine new political and human possibilities on Earth in the 21st century. It is to that to which I dedicate this campaign. I'm deeply grateful to all of you. I hope that you'll wake up every morning and send love to everybody in the world because that's what's going to fortify the strength and the resonance of this campaign so that on a subconscious level, people can just feel it. And that's what we've got going on here. Remember, wherever there's love, there are miracles. And we're going to have them. We're going to have them in this country. We're going to have them on this planet. Why? Because we said so. We're going to love. And where there is love, there will be peace. God bless everybody. Thank you so much. I'm really honored that you were here for this call. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Remember, be with me on Twitter. Be with me on Facebook. Be with me on Instagram. And please shout shout it from the rooftops. I need you to do that. Thanks so much.